Now, we did a program a few months ago now all about WikiLeaks and Assange, exposing some information about him and his supposed organisation. If you want to watch it, I suggest you watch it if you're going to watch this update that we're about to give. You really need to see that first to understand what we're about to update you on. And I'll put the link on the screen there. People can go and watch that. So the first thing that people contacted me on about that program was the Apple operating system, because we mentioned in that, we suggested that we didn't think that Apple developed their operating system using open source method, and it turns out that they did. So that's a correction that we want to make.
Okay.
So Apple is based on this operating system called Darwin, which was developed under open source rules. Assange claims to have contributed in some point to some of the modules. Now, I did have a look at some of those modules, and there are authors' names in the software, in the source code. Now, I'm not aware of Julian Assange's name being in any of those modules. If anyone can find one and send us it and show that Julian Assange actually was involved in writing any of this source code, send us it, and then we'll admit, yeah, he was involved. Okay, so that's that one dealt with. So I'm just going to read verbatim some viewers' comments, because we had a lot of feedback on that show, some of them very useful. Let's first touch on the whole issue of Ecuador and the Ecuadorian embassy. Ecuador, who was supposedly giving Julian Assange refuge. This viewer says, very good show on Assange. The country of Ecuador has been run by the CIA for many years. The day I found out he was in the embassy was enough for me, i.e. enough to make this person believe that he's just a CIA asset, essentially. Yeah. Now then, we also discussed this cult called the Family, which we showed a photograph or a video of a child that looked remarkably like Julian Assange. And I suspect that was Julian Assange, and Julian Assange was part of this mind control cult. That's my personal belief. Now this viewer says, hi Richard, after watching your film, I decided to do a bit of research on Julian myself. On the subject of mind control, I found out that a member of the family cult group called Marian Villamek was the owner/manager of New Haven Hospital in a place called Kew. The hospital was a psychiatric hospital where they used LSD and electroshock treatment, but also the cult leader Hamilton Byrne was the administrator of the hospital. Please have a look at page 7 of the attached document. And then this viewer's then sent me a PDF of a document entitled Sex Abuse in Victorian Catholicism, the Ronald Conway Connection. And on page 7, we have the New Haven Psychiatric Hospital, which was situated at 86 Normanby Road, Kew in Melbourne's Inner East. In the late 1960s and during the 1970s, New Haven Hospital was owned and managed by Marian Villamek, a member of a New Age sect called the Santa Nikitan Park Association, also known as the Family. A leader of the sect, Anne Hamilton Byrne, was also an administrator at the New Haven Conway. So that's evidence that these people who were running the cult were also involved in mind control techniques at another establishment, if these documents are correct. Now, for me, this was the best email that a viewer sent. Very perceptive, in my opinion. I'm going to read most of it because I think this is very important. So, this viewer is looking at Julian Assange's criminal record in the 1990s of his computer hacking and asking the question, does it seem plausible what happened to him after he was arrested? Okay, so let me just read this. He states, regarding the timeline of Assange's activities in the 90s as reported on his wiki page. To summarise, September 1991, discovered hacking into a Canadian telecom network. October 91, raided and presumably arrested for the same. 1993, giving technical advice to VP Child Exploitation Unit and assisted with prosecutions. 1993, involved in starting public ISP in Australia. 1994, began programming. 1994, charged with those 1991 crimes, 31 counts of hacking and related crimes. 1995, authored or co-authored a TCP port scanner. 1996, authors patches to PostgreSQL. 1996, authors Usenet caching software. 1996, pleads guilty to 25 of the 1994 charges, 6 of them dropped, 2,100 Australian dollars reparations. 1997, authored rubber hose deniable encryption system. Does this timeline make any sense, the viewer states? I think it does in one way, which is that if the dates and claims are accurate, it indicates that he was an asset from the moment he was arrested in 1991, if not before then. Think about it. The dude's arrested in 91 at the tender age of 17. It takes them 3 full years to bring charges. But meanwhile, he's assisting the Victoria Police. And with what? Child exploitation. Ring any bells? WikiLeaks? Pizzagate, anyone? Oh, and he finds time to get involved in starting one of the first public ISPs in Australia. That's an internet service provider. But alas, according to that published timeline, none of that assistance or involvement is enough to keep them from charging him for those 1991 crimes. True, it takes them until 1994 to do so, but charge him they do, if we're to believe what's written on that page. Still, none of this dampens his spirits or slows him down, apparently because even with 31 charges of hacking and related crimes hanging over his teenage head, Julian finds himself to author or co-author a TCP port scanner. Unfortunately, after apparently letting the case flounder for another 2 years, they finally get a guilty plea out of him in 1996 on 25 of the 31 charges. Here, one is left to wonder whether that assistance really did pay off, because despite the severity of the charges, Julian walks away from it all with a piddling fine of 2,100 Australian dollars. Once again, at 17, Assange would have been a juvenile at the time he committed these crimes. It does not normally take the justice system 3 full years to charge juveniles with crimes. Juvenile crime cases are in fact expedited in comparison to adults. There are less of them for one thing, and the law is more restrictive regarding possible penalties, etc. for another. If even a word of what's on that wiki page is true, and that is a really big if, then it would indicate to me that he was an asset at least from the moment of arrest and has apparently been one since. I see nothing to indicate otherwise. There is no way in hell that police would be allowing a teenage Uber hacker who's pled guilty to hacking into a major state-owned telecoms company to walk away with nothing but a fine. At the very least, there should have been included an injunction prohibiting him from using computers and so on. So this chap is convinced that Assange was recruited by authorities and he was working for them very, very early on as a teenager.
Well, I mean, this is the sort of thing we've seen, you know, and I may have mentioned this before, but there are several other 9/11 researchers that have turned out to have criminal records, you know, that we've ended up coming into contact with. So, again, the same old thing. When they've got something on you, you know, they can manipulate you.
Right. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I stated in the interview was that there seemed to be a gap from about 1999 up to when he starts WikiLeaks in 2006. And some people have said, oh, well, if you work in the IT field, you're not necessarily working for companies, you're freelance, so you might not have it on a CV. But a few people have attempted to try and fill in this period. We've got one emailer sent me an article from the Melbourne University Mathematics and Statistics website, and it's an article, or it's a press release from the 13th of September 2004. I'll not read it all out, but what this is about is that the Mathematics and Statistics Society at Melbourne University were running a treasure hunt. So they'd buried $200 and they were putting out various clues. They wanted people to try and solve them, and they were using the internet to get people from all over the world to try and solve these clues to try and get this $200. And it states here that the Society's president and vice president, Damjan Vukcevic and Julian Assange, respectively, say the mystery puzzle hunt is modelled on the famous MIT challenge. So Assange is connected with the Melbourne University's Mathematics and Statistics Society in 2004. Now, in the previous show, we stated that Assange wrote this rubber hose deniable encryption software in 1997, and I think Peter Zatko said that that was at Melbourne University. So he's attached to Melbourne University in 1997, and then also in 2004 at the age of 33. So I take it from that he must have had more than one stint at university. And the interesting thing is that he's never graduated in anything. He hasn't got a degree. So he's associated with Melbourne University from 1997 up to 2004, 97, 98, 99, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 7 years, and he hasn't got a degree. Now that's anomalous, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, was he doing a PhD? Was he a failed...
Was he picking his arse?
Yeah.
Right, so... I'll maybe cut that out. Just gets on my nerves, like, you know, I get annoyed by it. Now, somebody else sent me an article which is attempting to fill in some gaps, which actually doesn't fill in any gaps, really. This is an article from the Sydney Morning Herald in May 2010. So this article is written just before the Ecuadorian embassy affair nonsense, when he's supposedly leading some nomadic lifestyle. He's travelling around the world with his duffel bag and laptop. So I just want to read some of this out. It's the journalist asks him, does he have one base he'd call home? And he says, I have 4 bases where I would go if I was sick, which is how I think about where home is. So Assange mentions 4 bases but names only 2, the one in Iceland and another in Kenya, where he has spent a lot of time on and off in the past couple of years. So the Kroll report released on WikiLeaks reportedly swung the Kenyan presidential election in 2007. So this is what we were stating in the previous interview, that he's been used for geopolitics and to influence certain things on the geopolitical scale within governments and elections and that kind of thing. And it states that when he's in the country, this is in Kenya, Assange lives in a compound in Nairobi with other foreigners, mainly members of NGOs such as Medicines Sans Frontières. So that's an NGO, and we know what NGOs are used for. They're kind of mini psyops, masquerading as help organisations, but actually they've got hidden agendas. So he's been sheltered by some NGO. Now this has to go down in history as the most loaded question by any journalist. Right? Just look. This is an example of the worst kind of question that you should ask as a journalist. This is actually in the Sydney Morning Herald. Right? This is what the journalists wrote. Did being arrested and later on finding himself in a courtroom push him into a completely different reality that he had never thought about, and eventually in a direction that eventually saw him start thinking along the lines of the website like WikiLeaks? That would take on the world. Talk about putting some words in someone's mouth. So he answers,
yes.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. That experience showed me how the justice system and bureaucracy worked and did not work. I'm not going to read all that, blah, 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 blah. Right, so it says here, he spent 4 years studying maths, mostly at Melbourne University, with stints at the Australian National University in Canberra, but never graduated. Disenchanted, he says, with how many of his fellow students were conducting research for the US defence system. Right, so his mates are working for the US defence, and he didn't graduate because he was miffed that they were working for US defence. It is just a load of bollocks, isn't it? Assange says he did a lot of soul searching before he finally quit his studies in 2007. He had already started working with other people on a model of WikiLeaks.
Well, if he did a lot of soul searching, it seems he didn't find one, so...
Correct. And just to mention that you said that they often use criminals to become shills in various organisations, whether it be 9/11 research or what have you. We had all of this debacle about these rape allegations in Sweden. So I won't suggest that he raped anyone, but what I would suggest is that possibly that was a situation set up, an entrapment situation, in order to attempt to get a rape allegation in order to further control him through blackmail.
I mean, what I was saying was, once they've got something on you, so you may not have actually been charged with anything, but they may have evidence that, you could be charged if they put that evidence, and sent it to the police or whoever, or even to another family member that would make your life, miserable. Mm-hmm. So you can manipulate people in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And this is what I've printed here is a an extract from an article, I think in Vice magazine, and it says, as the saga possibly comes to an end, Vice US spoke to Melbourne University's Jerry Collier, who taught Assange maths back in 2006. Right, so that's 2 years after that. He's been taught maths. So how long is he at the university without getting a qualification? Is there a world record for being an academic at a university without getting a qualification? Right. So seems to me then, if he's kind of been placed there to learn certain skills for US intelligence probably, but they don't really need him to qualify in anything because that's not his role. They've got this rogue role model that they want to create, so he doesn't need to get a degree.
In other words, he's got a job, so he doesn't need to get a degree to get a job.
Yeah, yeah.
He's already got a job.
Yeah, because most people, when they do go to university, the reason why they're going there is to get a qualification so that they can then get a job.
That's right.
But it seems that he already had a job. That's why he didn't need to qualify. Yeah. Okay. Here's a few general comments. One viewer says that they recommend Dr. Steve Pieczenik on Assange and Snowden. Another viewer states, my role in Liverpool was as area manager of the Knowledge Quarter. This allowed me access to the universities of Liverpool, where I moved around with great ease. I was in one of Liverpool University's staff coffee bars. I was close to 2 university lecturers, one a professor, one a PhD. Their conversation was about the recent WikiLeaks, and they concluded that it was a CIA operation that allowed the CIA to have limited hangout whilst smearing the enemies of the US empire. This next viewer states, everyone knew about NSA databases and global information retrieval years before Julian Assange leaked it. So maybe it all has to do with destabilising foreign governments, if that come up again. This viewer states that there are 2 core functions of WikiLeaks. One, to get a head start on actual leaks. In other words, if you are a government employee or you've got access to a secret document, WikiLeaks is probably the first organisation you're going to send it to. So they know what's being leaked then by having this one organisation, so they can keep an eye on people who are leaking things. That's what he's saying. And 2, they have prevented someone outside their sphere of influence creating the #1 leaks site. Right, this viewer states that I think his ex-girlfriend, Assange's ex-girlfriend, possibly the one that accompanied him in Norwich, is worth a mention. Mentions here, 3rd paragraph. She is involved with another shill hacker, Laurie Love, ultimately designed to tighten up on the internet, in my opinion. So this next viewer just gives credence to John Young from the Cryptome website, stating that he named one of the people who was there at the Kennedy assassination, the Japanese intelligence agent, I think it was.
Yes.
I'm a bit surprised you didn't mention the George CFR Clooney connection, i.e. his wife is his lawyer. Did you know about that?
No, I didn't know about that.
George Clooney's wife has been Assange's lawyer. I didn't know that either. But Clooney is allegedly connected to the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes. All
right, so just the feedback asserted what the opinions that we put forward in the programme, I think, or
Yes, I think you got some that was backing up what you were saying, and obviously you got some extra information which filled in 1 or 2 gaps. I don't think there was anything major really which refuted the idea that Julian Assange is not really who he is purported to be, in terms of somebody that's purely interested in the truth and wanting to, basically disclose the dodgy dealings of governments and secret, part of those governments. He's not really interested in that.
Yeah.
He has another thing that interests him.
All right, Andrew. Well, thanks for that, and we're going to record another show, and so keep your tea towel shirt on there for the next show.
Well, I'll dry a few cups before we do the next recording.